Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me-
anyone have an answer?
Well played.
Good game.
Greetings, aristocrats. This is Jumbo Commander, and today's deck tech is Elenda the Dusk Rose. Elenda is straight out of Rivals of Ixalan, and Elenda's an interesting black-white vampire. Elenda the Dusk Rose is 2 white-black for a 1/1 legendary creature vampire knight. Elenda has lifelink, and whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Elenda the Dusk Rose. When Elenda dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink where X is Elenda's power. I really love Orzhov commanders. Let's take a closer look at Elenda the Dusk Rose. First off, this is a token deck, so many tokens, and the ability to make a lot could be easy. I mean, you flood the board with tokens, they naturally die, your Elenda gets bigger and creates more tokens. This seems like a great thing. Well, but actually, Elenda proves to be more problematic than we might think. It's because the trigger is a dies trigger when Elenda dies. And if we replace that dies with go to the command zone instead, then we get no 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink. Well, that just means we have a little bit more to work with, a little bit more to tinker with. It would have been nice if Wizards gave us something that worked really well, but actually, if we could keep casting Elenda from the command zone, this might actually be too good. With the right sacrifice outlets, we could keep making tokens and casting Elenda, and even with the commander tax, kind of go infinite. Yeah, so maybe it's a good thing that there's this dies ability with Elenda. And you know what, it might just be powerful enough on its own. I wonder how this is going to work. Well, the thing I described, the ability to sort of play a bunch of tokens and sacrifice them and then get value draining your opponent, that's a deck. That's an aristocrats deck. And it's a fun deck to play. So let's explore what it takes to make Elenda the Dusk Rose a powerful commander general. The first thing I'd like to say is yes, this is a token deck, so please feel free to include all of your favorite token makers in Orzhov, your Hallowed Spirit Keepers, Grave Titans, Edric Sars, Hangerback Walkers, Anointed Processions, Machaeus Lunarch. All of these can combine together to make a token deck even without very much help from your commander. That way your commander can kind of take you over the top. It doesn't need to be there and functioning for you to actually have your deck work. It will make tokens and pump them and do crazy aristocratic stuff even without your commander. The first thing I want to talk about is how powerful Elenda is. It's a pun. It's because when Elenda dies, you get tokens based on her power. And so if you buff her power, you get more tokens. I'm thinking Hatred. Hatred lets you pay X life and target creature gets +X+O until end of turn. This is instant. Just imagine if you sink all of your life into crazy amounts of vampires, and guess what? These vampires have lifelink, so you might be able to swing and gain almost all of that life back in your very next turn. And plus, Hatred can just 21 commander damage someone to death. Next up is an enchantment, and it basically represents what this deck wants to do. It's not a very good enchantment. It's an aura called Fallen Ideal. 2 and a black, and it says enchanted creature has flying, and sacrifice a creature. This creature gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So wait a second. In this deck, I want other creatures to die to give Elenda +1/+1. So I need sack outlets. And so this gives me a sack outlet. And then also, it gives Elenda +2/+1 until end of turn. So every creature I sacrifice pumps her power by 3. Oh my gosh, that's just amazing. And by the way, it doesn't say sacrifice another, it's just sacrifice a creature. So you can actually sacrifice Elenda to the Fallen Ideal at the very end, just puking out tons of life-linking vampires. And guess what? When Fallen Ideal is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return it to its owner's hand so you can do it all over again. Yeah, the problem is that you can't keep doing it all over again with Elenda. If you send her to the graveyard, she stays there. which means you need some ways to get around that, to be able to play Elenda multiple times per game. You're gonna get board wipe, you're gonna get disrupted. So, how about another aura? Just kind of off the top of my head, Gift of Immortality. When enchanted creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Then it gets the Gift of Immortality back again. Not only does it protect Elenda, but also it lets Elenda die, only to resurrect it again. This is going to be another fundamental idea of this deck, to be able to keep this recursion machine going. So these two auras, although they might seem a little bit bad, really represent how this deck is supposed to work. Tokens and sacrifice outlets and death triggers and coming back again, and all of it together with crazy amounts of value. There's one more thing that does a really great job of pumping power of your creatures, and that's equipment. And there's one equipment that does it better than all the rest, and that's Blade of the Bloodchief. It's because Elenda is a vampire. When a creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature unless it's a vampire. Then you put 2 on it. So that means that whenever another creature dies, Elenda puts a +1/+1 counter on it for itself. And then Blade of the Bloodchief says, oh no, 2 more. I hope you can see the potential here. Another piece of equipment that works particularly well is Blade of Selves. Once you've equipped Elenda, then it has Myriad, and you create multiple copies of her, which legend rule themselves to death immediately. But they do legend rule themselves to death. And then you can get those wonderful vampire tokens and get those counters on your real Elenda. I know it's not the most ideal of situations. There are Blade of Selves targets that are better, and do you know what? There might even be better versions in this deck. What about Blade of Selvesing up that Grave Titan? That seems really great. So it might just be an excellent value card. Alright, so from this section you get an idea of what's going on in this deck, and I've introduced a lot of the token makers. Many of them are whatever you want, your Hangerback Walkers, your Grave Titans, but also your commander. But your commander and those other tokens don't really get a lot of advantage until they die. So let's sacrifice them for value with Ashnod's Altar, generating more mana to do more things. Spawning Pit is a free sacrifice outlet that gives us more tokens. This is exactly what we're looking for. And we have other free sacrifice outlets too, although not for as much value. Cartel Aristocrat gives it protection from a color until end of turn, but that was a key card in one of the Aristocrats decks, so I think I put it here. I think Maw of Obsidian could be really interesting. Although it's a little bit pricey at 5 CMC for a 3/3, this ability, sacrifice a creature to pump all your other creatures until end of turn. Not only can that get your Elenda really big, it can also be the difference between making 1/1 vampires useless and very formidable. The same thing can be said with something like Indulgent Aristocrat, but having to pay 2 mana means that we can't kind of go off and go crazy. We really want to value these free sacrifice outlets. That's why Viscera Seer is a classic version of this, and by the way, both of these are vampires. Very nice. You know, if we're relying on Viscera Seer and Indulgent Aristocrat, then we could run Ranger of Eos to fetch them up. I don't know. But these 1-drop vampires remind me of another vampire, Yahenni Undying Partisan, with another free sacrifice outlet. Sometimes sacrifice outlets are not as free, but they're just so good we want to include them anyways. Sadistic Hypnotist says, sacrifice a creature, target player discards 2 cards. Activate this ability only at any time you could cast a sorcery. Okay, that is crippling. You can just empty everyone's hands, get your Elenda huge, and the game could basically be over. But you have to do this at sorcery speed. It's really powerful, but it's not always available, and sometimes we're gonna need to sacrifice things instantly. So Razakath, the Foul-Blooded, can do that. It can sacrifice another creature instantly for tremendous value, a tutor. But it is limited in another way. We have to pay 2 life. And although life is not that important in Commander, we can spare 2 life, and Razakath is gonna be a powerful include in this deck, but an 8 mana sacrifice outlet, that might just be a little bit slow. How about Eiley, the Eternal Pilgrim? Gives us a great sacrifice ability, gaining life, and then a Vindicate on a stick, but you have to pay 1. Okay, so all of these are limited in a certain way, including that vampire from the previous slide. But we do want sacrifice outlets, and these can be easily recurred. It's not like we're paying for and tapping something. So I think that this could be really good. And this transitions us to our next category, which is gaining more advantage by sacrificing things. We have a little bit of an advantage from these cards, but a card like Blasting Station, it lets you sacrifice a creature to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. And then when a creature comes into play, you can untap Blasting Station. So this means that it's a one-time sacrifice outlet, but if you can chain together a lot of your enter the battlefield effects, you can just keep tapping and untapping Blasting Station and do a ton of damage. And so that's why this card transitions us into the next category, because this is where the aristocrats come in. Zulaport Cutthroat, Falconwrath Noble, and Blood Artist. All of these are great cards because as things die, you just slowly drain out the board. Oh my gosh, they're so powerful. And so now we see what we're going to use all of these tokens for and all of these sacrifice outlets for. We get a little bit of value when we sacrifice, and then when something dies, these things drain your opponents slowly out of the game. I'd also like to include Pious Evangel because it flips into Wayward Disciple. Whenever another creature you control dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Now, a lot of these are different. Some of them affect only the creatures you control, some of them affect all creatures, some of them say opponents, or some of them just say target opponent. So make sure you know which key draining creature you have, because it's going to affect your play. As long as things are dying, Dictative Erebos and Grave Pact turn it into a chain reaction. Remember, Elenda grows when your opponent's creatures die too. So a few of your tokens die, then their creature dies, then Elenda grows even bigger and bigger, and then you sacrifice Elenda and more of their stuff dies, and then your board gets flooded with tokens. Oh my gosh. You can create your own board wipes with these amazing enchantments. There are a few creatures that give a similar effect, but I like Smothering Abomination. Easy to cast, 2 black for a 4/3 flyer. That's a relevant creature. And at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. The downside. Oh, but there's a following upside. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. That doesn't just mean the creature you sacrifice to Smothering Abomination. It means that as you're going through and Viscera Searing things or Blasting Station things, then you're going to be drawing cards as well. Gate to the Afterlife is a little bit of a janky artifact. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you gain 1 life. Then you can loot, draw a card, and if you do, discard a card. All right, it's not drawing a card, it's not draining your opponent, you're gaining life, it's not even the tokens, because it's like a token deck. Why is Gate to the Afterlife in here? Oh, you can activate Gate to the Afterlife, sacrifice it, and get a little card known as God Pharaoh's Gift. I'm just going to pause that right there and just have God Pharaoh's Gift in the back of your mind. As we move on to other advantages of sacrificing, Black Market. Do you like mana? Because Black Market will give you all of the mana. And there's a few other creatures that are really strong when you sacrifice. Obnixilis Unshackled is representative of a group of creatures that grows when you sacrifice. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Obnixilis Unshackled. So Obnixilis can just get huge as you go off and keep sacrificing a bunch of tokens. You could one-shot someone with this crazy card. Not to mention, the punishment of your opponent searching their library is very satisfying. And then there's Vindictive Lich, which represents the dies creatures. A lot of people are very familiar with Enter the Battlefield triggers, but dies triggers are also really cool, and Vindictive Lich has an amazing one. You have to choose a different opponent for each of these abilities, but target opponent sacrifices a creature, target opponent discards 2 cards, and target opponent loses 2 life. 5 life! Wow! That's crazy value, and there's other creatures, Kakusho off the top of my head, that do a really good job of this dies trigger, and we don't see them as often as ETB creatures, so this is a fun opportunity for us to play with these really interesting cards. You know, now that you mention dies triggers, or, you know, leaves the battlefield triggers, I have to think of one of the best, Revelark. Revelark is insane. When Revelark leaves the battlefield, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Wow, that could be a lot of really great creatures. like, I don't know, our commander. Revel Arc can just die and get our commander right back onto the battlefield. And our commander might be in the graveyard because we have to send her there in order to get those vampires. And you know what? There's a lot of other small creatures in this deck. If you think about all of those aristocrats, the Zulaport Cutthroat, the Falconwrath Noble, the Blood Artist, those are all small powered. Same thing with all of our sacrifice outlets. The Indulgent Aristocrat, the Viscera Seer, Yahenni, all of those are really small powered too. So Revel Arc becomes an incredibly valuable creature in this deck. And that brings up our next category, which is Recursion. Now, the ability to keep cycling through all of these sacrifice for value and bring things back and do crazy stuff really balances with our commander, because we need to recycle our commander to keep getting value out of her. So the first thing I'd like to point out is sort of the ideal. The ideal would be make sure we get that death trigger, but then still send our commander to the command zone. That's kind of what we want, but how do we do that? We can achieve that with one card that is amazing on its own right, and that's Mimic That. Mimic That says 3 and imprint. Whenever a non-token creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may exile that card. If you do, return each other card exiled with Mimic That to its owner's graveyard. So that's not even the fun part of Mimic That, and I'm going to stop right there because that does what we want it to do. Basically, what we can say is we can have our commander die, and it will enter into the graveyard, causing her to spew vampires out on the battlefield. Okay, but then Mimic That says, hey, a creature just entered the graveyard. Please let me try to exile, let me try to imprint it on the Mimic That. So you can try to do that, and then as a replacement effect for that commander changing zones, you can stick it back into the command zone. Now, that sounds a little bit complicated, but let's explain. Every time your commander changes zones, from the battlefield to exile, to the graveyard, to your hand, to your library, whatever, you can replace that with, I send it to the command zone, right? So basically, as the commander dies, you say, no, I decline. It's going to go to the graveyard. Okay, it goes to the graveyard, and Mimic That says, hey, let's exile it. And then you say, whoa, 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 instead of exiling, I want to send it to the command zone. And that's how it works. I don't know, Mimic That also has this amazing ability where you just keep creating copies of creatures that, you know, go away at the end of the turn. It's no big deal anyways. Okay. Also, Planner Void, whenever a card is put into the graveyard, remove that card from the game. It does have the creatures hit the graveyard and then get removed. So essentially you'll get the trigger, it'll be removed, and then you can stick it into the command zone. Same thing with a card like Purgatory. Whenever a summon card is put into your graveyard from play, put that card face up under Purgatory. During your upkeep, you may pay 4 and 2 life to put any card under Purgatory into play as though it were just played. Okay, so by the way, this is actually a cool card because it lets you replay the cards that get caught underneath Purgatory, and that's exactly what we want to do. So Purgatory is kind of an awkward version of Mimic That, or some sort of awkward recursion. And we're not looking for awkward recursion, we're looking for really strong recursion. Corpse Dance can pull things out of the graveyard only to send them back again. Whip of Erebos pulls things out of the graveyard but then exiles it and you can send it back to the command zone. Nim Deathmantle does crazy stuff. You can send things to the graveyard then bring them back again. Nim Deathmantle will definitely go infinite with a lot of token producers and an ability to produce mana like the Ashnod's Altar I mentioned. There's even cards like Angelic Renewal giving you one-off return effects. Shiri Shizo's Caretaker does some crazy stuff with one power creatures. Just keep sacrificing and bring them back. In fact, decks that are built around Shiri are really ridiculous and funny. And then there's that God Pharaoh's Gift I mentioned before. So if your commander just happens to be in your graveyard, you can exile it with God Pharaoh's Gift, create a copy that's a crazy 4/4, and then you have your commander back into the command zone. Because if your commander ever changes zones, goes from your graveyard to exile, boom, straight back into the command zone. That means that things that exile your commander out of your graveyard can let you replay them out of the command zone. Bojuka Bog and Scavenger Grounds are easy includes. Not only do they disrupt your opponent, but you can use them on yourself to make sure that you can recast your commander. Same thing goes with Nile Spellbomb or Relic of Progenitus. Heck, Relic of Progenitus, you can just tap and get rid of the exact card you need to out of your graveyard. Including creatures like Stonecloaker, it can save something, but also take that card out of your graveyard and let you put it back into your command zone. And Agent of Erebos. Now, these are all cards that can also incredibly disrupt your opponent. Is your opponent playing a Mirren deck? Are they planning on doing a Mizzix Mastery? Then disrupt them by enabling your own graveyard shenanigans. I love it. I also think I have to mention some activated abilities like Scrap Heap Scrounger. If it's in the graveyard, you can exile your other creature and get it back. It's an unimpressive creature. Withered Wretch also has targeted, removal from the graveyard. I don't know, but they are recurable. And Skeletal Scrying is a draw spell that relies on exiling things from the graveyard. Pretty interesting. But I just keep coming back to Revelark. It's so good. And not to mention, you can easily throw in Karmic Guide. Karmic Guide is good on its own as well, because you can use it to bring back your general, and it combos perfectly with Revelark, and you already have so many sacrifice outlets in this deck. It's just a perfect match. And Revelark also has me thinking of other cards that bring back creatures with power 2 or less. I'm thinking of Dusk to Dawn, and that could be really powerful as well. Wipe out a board, keep all your vampires intact, dawn back a lot of your little things that you need to recur. And now that I'm thinking about it, you can get a lot of value with other board wipes. One of my favorite board wipes has to be Tragic Arrogance, because it lets you personally manipulate the board and have so many opportunities for politics. And it really is the case here too, because you can pick Elenda as your one creature, watch the rest of the board just get destroyed, and Elenda get huge. Now I have to remind you of something. Not all exile effects are equal. We are playing with Recursion and exile at the same time. It's a little bit awkward. We might want to Bojuka Bog ourselves to get our commander back, and then when we draw our Dusk Dawn or Revelark, nothing happens. So make sure that you know that you're playing a lot of nombos with yourself. And also you have to be very aware of other cards, like Rest in Peace. If you have a card that directly exiles your commander, then you will never get that. So don't play Rest in Peace or other cards that directly exile. Instead, you want to be flirting with the graveyard and then exile your commander to the command zone. I have one last piece of recursion that transitions me to my next topic, and that's Ravos Soul Tender. Ravos is a partner commander that pumps your creatures. Wait a second, aren't we about to put a bunch of vampires on the battlefield? Yes, we are. And also returns creature cards from the graveyard to your hand, getting back your commander. It seems to match up perfectly. And now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it does match up perfectly with this entire strategy rather than the commander itself. We could have Ravos Soul Tender and Timna the Weaver be partner commanders of this exact same deck. And that might have you wondering, are there too many hoops? Is there too much I have to jump through in order to make this commander work? And that might be true. I think I'm going to try out Elenda, and I'm going to find out how crazy this Rube Goldberg Aristocrats machine can get. I'm going to see how easy it is to recur her and how often I win by draining out my opponents, because that's my intent. And you know what? If Elenda doesn't work, I can always change it up because there's so much potential for this commander as a part of the 99. Edgar Markov is perfect with this. Not only does Edgar Markov go wide with his own strategy, Elenda can then pump it up with the +1/+1 counters. We can see how synergistic the vampires are. It's just going to be amazing. Queen Marchesa is an amazing token general in these colors. I recently played against a Queen Marchesa token build at GP Santa Clara. Thank you for the games. They were really fun, and your Queen Marchesa deck is really sweet. I'm going to borrow that list pretty soon. Also, if we want to go with Aristocrats, Athreos God of Passage could be a really great card as well. It keeps draining your opponent as you regain value. I mean, it just makes sense. Or Alicia Who Smiles at Death, a very aggressive commander, but plays with those creatures that have power 2 or less. And this is exactly Elenda. Or another token commander, Teysa Orzhov Scion. See, we can see that these color combinations fit perfectly with this aristocrat style deck. So if you're not taken with Elenda herself, you can explore her in many other options and take the shell of this deck and export it to something new and exciting. So tell me, what did you think of Elenda? Is she too complicated, or are you excited to make her work? Tell me in the comments below. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video, and thank you to my patrons for supporting me. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Jumbo Commander, and I make all sorts of videos on YouTube. I plan on making more, so make sure to subscribe so that you can see the next ones.